But at least two top Republicans are calling explosive testimony, appearing to be shedding new light on the Trump-Russia investigation. Sources have told Fox News a former FBI official told congressional investigators that a lawyer linked to the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign gave them information for the Russia probe in late 2016. They were at that time preparing a surveillance warrant for Trump campaign aide Carter Page. Doug McElway is live in Washington with more. Doug?
Hi, Harris. This latest information, uncovered through the reporting of Fox News' Catherine Herridge, presents further evidence that the Trump-Russia collusion narrative was concocted by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee, then presented to the FBI to obtain a FISA warrant on Trump advisor Carter Page. It all centers around lawyer Michael Sussman, who worked for the Clinton and DNC through the Democratic law firm of Perkins Coie. In a closed-door deposition on Wednesday, FBI General Counsel James Baker told members of the House Intelligence and Government Oversight Committees that in late 2016, he was given documents by Perkins Coie lawyer Sussman. Sussman handed over those documents just before the FBI crafted its surveillance warrant to spy on the Trump campaign's Carter Page. Now, here's two of those Republican members who were at that deposition.
I think some really important information. We're not allowed to get into all the details, but I will tell you one thing that stuck out to me is we know Bruce Orr was giving information to the FBI. We know Christopher Steele was giving information to the FBI. We also learned today that there was another source giving information directly to the FBI that dealt with the Russian investigation.
I think reiterating what Jim said is probably the most informative interview that we've had to date. Some of the things that were shared were explosive in nature. I mean, I couldn't believe that I was hearing some of the testimony that here in the United States that the DOJ and FBI were involved with.
In a statement, Perkins Coie said, and I quote, "When Sussman met with Mr. Baker on behalf of a client, it was not connected to the firm's representation of the Hillary Clinton campaign, the DNC, or any political law group client." Harris, it's important to note that the clock may run out on House Republicans' attempts to delve deeper into this if Democrats regain control of the House in the midterms. Back to you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Doug McElway, thank you very much. I want to bring in now Stephen Mulroy, a former federal prosecutor and law professor at the University of Memphis, to help me look at this. Great to see you today, Stephen. You know, my first question would have to be about how normal is it for an attorney for one political camp, in this case Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC, to have a go back and forth with the FBI about another presidential candidate? How normal is that?
Well, I don't know how normal it is for a lawyer for a presidential campaign, because presidential campaigns very rarely are involved in these kinds of FBI investigations, so I think that's true. But it isn't at all abnormal for somebody who has a bias against the target of an investigation to be providing dirt on that, and FBI people get those kinds of tips from people who do not like the subject of the investigation all the time. That's not unheard of.
But what do they usually do with that information, I guess, is my question. I mean, the FBI has already been trying to fight against what they call those bad apples inside the agency. Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, who were texting that they wanted to keep this president out of the White House. I mean, there was already a cooking narrative at that time. We didn't know about it yet, but it was already simmering. So how would the FBI best handle something like this?
Well, the best way for the FBI to handle it is to take a look at the information and see if it's credible, see if there's any corroborating evidence. And if they do find that it's credible, then there's nothing wrong with them using that as the basis for their investigation. They don't have to turn a blind eye to it just because the person that gave it to them may not like the target of the investigation. I think it's also important for the FBI to disclose to any judge, in this case a FISA judge, that the source of the information was somebody who had a political motivation. Now, according to the Department of Justice Inspector General's report, they did do that, and there wasn't evidence to find that they didn't change what they would otherwise do in a normal investigation. So are there people involved here who didn't like the president? Yes. That doesn't necessarily, from a legal standpoint, invalidate the investigation itself.
All right, so this finding these revelations are being called explosive. What category would you put it in? And I see you nodding. Why?
I'm nodding because I understand why those on the side of defending the president or wanting to criticize the FBI would call them explosive. And certainly any connection at all to the DNC or the Clinton campaign is going to raise eyebrows. I don't know if I personally would call it explosive for the reasons that I just said. I don't think it's all that extraordinary to find out that the person who originally gave the dirt on the target of the investigation was someone who didn't like that target of the investigation. That happens all the time. The FBI is trained to discount for that and to check to see if they find the information credible on their own from an objective standpoint.
Well, one thing is for sure, we do want to know more about the FISA court and what they saw and what they continue to see. The more we learn about what can be put in front of that court, the more questions, at least, that I have. And I understand what the IG has found out. The Inspector General is still working. So we conceivably could find out even more.
True.
Stephen Mulray, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so after 3 out of 4 key senators voted to advance Judge Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court today, will they vote the same way tomorrow? And will Republicans need the Democrat that they picked up today, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, to get Judge Brett Kavanaugh, the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh? The 4 key swing votes shook out as follows. Republican Lisa Murkowski was a no on pushing forward for a final vote, Judge Kavanaugh. Republican Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, and Democrat Joe Manchin all said yes. So what, if anything, does that tell us about the final floor vote that's expected to come tomorrow? Also, the White House says it has the votes. Let's bring in Power Panel. Noel Nikpour, Republican strategist. And back from the center seat on Outnumbered, Jake McAbee. He's had a little protein so he can come back. Former chief speechwriter for Attorney General Loretta Lynch and former policy advisor to the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. Jake and Noel, great to see you both. Noel, we haven't heard from you today, so I want to start with you. Sure. Historically, when someone votes for cloture and debate ending, they typically vote in favor of whatever the matter or the person is. But we don't know that, to be sure. The White House feels like Judge Kavanaugh has the votes. The configuration may include some Democrats.
It may, and we were talking about this before the show, and, it's not for sure that we can count on Senator Collins. I mean, that may not be a for sure vote that we can count on. Also, I was a little surprised that Heidi Heitkamp went with a firm no. She's in a very tight race, so that was a little surprising.
Red State Democrat.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe that this is a signal that she may be losing that seat, and she's going to go down with her party, with a vote for the Democrat side versus siding with the Republicans.
Jake?
I think what's really interesting about the vote totals as they're shaken out now is that there's a bipartisan vote against Judge Kavanaugh with Lisa Murkowski. So that, to me, is really interesting because, we've heard for the last week and for even longer that there's sort of a Democratic plot against this nominee and that this is all a partisan exercise. But when you've got a Republican senator from Alaska saying, hang on, I don't think that this guy is right for the court, which is most likely what she's doing with this vote against cloture, then I think we're in sort of interesting territory.
We don't know that to be the case, though. We just know that she voted no on cloture.
And she recently changed her vote going into the chamber, so, I mean, she could change it back.
She could. I want to show you this, though, because Joe Manchin, and I asked Sarah Sanders with the White House about this, how surprised are you to see a Democrat jump across? I mean, Joe Manchin actually has bucked Democrats 3 important times to note. He was the only Democratic senator to vote for Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, the only Democratic senator to vote for Steve Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary, and one of just 3 Senate Democrats to vote for Judge Gorsuch for Supreme Court. What does that tell you about Joe Manchin?
Well, I will tell you something about Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is a very interesting senator. I will tell you that I raise national money for candidates, and some of my top bundler donors have actually given money to Joe Manchin. They have crossed the aisle and given him money, and they said that he's our kind of guy, meaning that he is voted a lot of times on, as Harris just said, some Republican candidates to get them confirmed. So it's very interesting. I know for a fact that he has been with a lot of Republican donors hunting and fishing and doing things. So I kind of look at him as that old blue dog Democrat from a long time ago when the Democratic Party used to be labeled as, blue dog when they had a little bit more centrist candidates.
All right, I'm going to bring back the power panel. We've got some breaking news on the flip side of this that we want to get to. The president is going after Democrats. We'll be right back.
Senators will vote on Brett Kavanaugh. We'll run through what happens if Susan Collins says yay and if she doesn't. Plus, what happens if they have to hold the vote open to get Senator Steve Daines back from his daughter's wedding to vote on Kavanaugh? We'll explain. And Republicans in one state saying Kavanaugh is having a huge positive impact when they go door knocking. Is the Democrats' enthusiasm shrinking? We'll discuss it all on the Daily Briefing.
Breaking news now. In a high-profile murder case, a police officer was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the shooting of a black teenager in Chicago, Illinois. That teenager shot 16 times. We now know that the verdict is in. It takes some time to get everybody back into the courtroom. So we will await here on Fox News for what that verdict will be. Officer Jason Van Dyke, a 40-year-old father of 2, faces life in prison in the shooting. And 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, again, this happened in 2014, shot 16 times. All of it caught on video camera. And it sparked, you may recall, weeks of protests in Chicago. There is a verdict in this high-profile murder case. We will bring it to you as we learn it. President Trump firing back, what I was talking about just before the commercial break, after Democrats and Christine Blasey Ford's attorneys continue to blast the FBI inquiry into Judge Kavanaugh. They're calling it a sham investigation orchestrated by the White House. During a rally in Minnesota last night, the president went after what he calls the Democrats' politics of anger and destruction. Power panel stayed. Here they are, Noel Nikpour, Jake Maccabee. Noel, what is this at the core, do you think, that is political?
Well, I think that this has now become the Democrats' message. I think that their messaging is beyond this trial, actually. I think it's going straight to the heart of getting rid of President Trump. I really do. And I think the message for the Democrats has basically become a battle cry. It has been a different groups sprouting up here and there, depending on what the subject matter is just very angry people that are getting out and representing the Democratic Party, which I feel like they've left some of the other Democrats by the wayside. It seemed like the fringe part of the party has taken off, but I do believe that this Kavanaugh, now that they're coming out and they're trying to keep this relevant, they're trying to keep this in the news, no matter if Brett Kavanaugh gets the confirmation, this is going to be the next battle cry heading into the midterms to try to A, raise money, B, get out the vote, and C, maybe defining the Democratic Party's message going into the midterms.
Jake?
Well, look, we're 31 days away from the midterms, and the message or the news that we're hearing today isn't going to be all everybody's talking about over the next 31 days. There are going to be a lot of things that we need to talk about, and that includes healthcare, which has been the biggest thing that Democrats have been advertising about across House candidates. We're going to be talking about economic opportunity and not just funneling money to the wealthy people in America.
You think you can get better than 3.7 unemployment? 3.7% unemployment. You think Democrats can do that? Because you hadn't done it. It hasn't been done in 49 years.
Well, this is the tail end of the longest economic expansion in American history that started 8.5 years ago with President Obama. So there's no doubt that we're on a good trajectory. But here's the question is, when you have a good economy, what do you do with it? Do you invest in middle class, in the working Americans, or do you funnel it to the richest people in America, which is what this president has done?
Your words?
Well, I mean, I understand that you're giving us the Democratic talking points, and I respect that. That's fine. But what we have, in my opinion, before us is we actually have one of the biggest economic booms that we've seen in a long time. And, like President Trump, don't like President Trump, but you can't deny what's going on.
No, I'm not denying it. But how long has that boom been going on? How long has this rise in economic fortunes been going on? This didn't just start with Donald Trump's inauguration. This has been going on for 8.5 years, and we're finally getting to a point after the Great Recession where people are starting to feel it, but the problem is most people who are starting to feel it are the most economically advantaged people in the country and large corporations.
But there have been a lot of things attributing to where we are right now under Trump's leadership. And like I said, you know, I know the Democrats have a problem with his personality, how he handles things, but under his administration, things are going, he's done more for, you know, getting rid of a lot
of...
of...
Got to wrap it up. I'm so sorry, Noel.
Thank you very much.
We'll bring you back. Stay tuned. Judge Kavanaugh, how will people vote? I'm Harris. Here's Dana.